36.7 just has to be maybe my favorite individual section in all of AP Bio. I just love this because there are so many great examples. Some of these examples will literally, and not like in a super profound way, but it's just amazing. Some of them make me laugh so hard, and some just make me like want to cry. It's just really interesting to me. 36.7. So let's start with a really funny one. Some of these I will really encourage you to pause this video and watch, and some will be like in between, and some like, this is like something you can do if you have the time, okay? So this first one is in between. If you want to watch this, go ahead. But this sets the stage to understanding what we're talking about. Animals are not consciously thinking about every decision they make, right? Animals are not people. They might be conscious to a degree, that's up for debate. But like, for example, in America, we have deer crossing signs. Now, I know you might not have ever been to a country that has deer crossing signs, or maybe you're very familiar with them. But a deer crossing sign is on roads, and it tells drivers where the deer are going to cross the road. Because the deer can cross the road very quickly, and then if the car's driving fast and they don't see the deer coming, they will hit the deer and there'll be an accident, right? This is kind of like how a couple years ago, 5 years ago, I was on a scooter motorcycle and a wild dog jumped out of the bush in front of me. I hit the dog and I fell and I broke my hand, and that was just not fun, okay? And so there's this video clip you can look up, and I linked it, of a lady calling into a radio station to complain to the radio station that they're putting deer signs in inconvenient places, and the deer are crossing in very inconvenient places as a result of these signs. The deer are not looking at the signs and saying, let me cross here, right? Deers are not looking at the signs and saying, let me cross here. The signs are there to tell the deer, to say that that's where the deer are crossing, right? Deers are not humans. They're not thinking about things like humans. Deers are animals, and a lot of their behaviors and such are subconscious traits, right, that have evolved over time. And we can study them and that's behavioral ecology. That's what behavioral ecology is, to study animal traits over time and how they respond to the environment. So behavior is a change in the activity of an organism in response to a stimulus. And we can discuss nature versus nurture, which we've talked about a little bit at other times. The nature versus nurture debate involves the extent to which particular aspects of behavior are a product of either inherited, like genetic things, or acquired or learned influences throughout the course of a human's lives or an animal's life or whatever. What is a genetic trait, something that they will all have, and what's learned throughout the course of life. So innate behaviors have a strong genetic component and are largely independent of the environment or what the organism has quote-unquote learned. Learned behaviors are the opposite of innate behaviors and result from learning. So you teach a dog a trick that is learned, right? You tell a puppy to sit, it's not going to know what to do. But if a puppy has learned what sit means and that it gets a treat, then it will do it. So behavioral biology includes the study of the biological and evolutionary basis for changes in behavior. Behaviors evolved as a result of pressures of natural selection. There are innate behaviors, largely tied to genetic inheritance, and learned behaviors, which are more dependent on the environment. Part of the goal in behavioral biology is to determine to what extent a behavior is influenced by each of these. 2. Ethology is the scientific and objective study of animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions and viewing behavior as an evolutionary adaptive trait. Because behavior is also a form of evolution, and animals evolve their behavior. And so we can analyze nature versus nurture and see to what extent is something innate and to what extent is it learned. Humans also have innate behaviors. If you put your hand on a stove, your hand, you don't have to think about it. Or if you put your hand on a thorn that you accidentally touch, you don't have to think, gosh, that hurts. Should I remove your finger? By the time you even realized it hurts and what happened, your hand is already off of it. No one No one has to tell a baby to cry. As a dad, I can attest. No one has to tell baby, okay, so when you're hungry, baby, and you want breast milk, you just have to cry, and then we'll give you attention. No one has to tell a baby that. A baby starts crying right away, okay? That's an innate behavior. If you have some extra time, you could look up deep tendon reflexes by Stanford Medicine and see an example of innate behaviors as it relates to medicine in humans. And that would be an example of a reflex action, an involuntary and rapid response to a stimulus. Right? You touch your knee and that one spot in your leg moves. Doctors like to do that to you. I don't know why. I think they're just trying to annoy you. I don't really think that. Okay, kinesis is undirected movement in response to a stimulus. Orthokinesis is the increased or decreased speed of movement of an organism in response to a stimulus. Whereas taxis is the directed movement towards or away from a stimulus. So it can be positive or negative, towards or away. So you turn on a light, and the cockroaches that are in the dark are going to run away from the light. That's taxis. Okay, whereas kinesis would be if they're running randomly. But I think cockroaches would be taxis, running away from the light pretty directly. Why are bugs, but other types of bugs, like flying bugs, are attracted to light? So for example, if you're outside of your apartment building late at night, you might notice a huge amount of those little bugs, right? Why is that? If you have some extra time, you could look up Smarter Every Day 103 if this interests you, and see why are bugs attracted to light. Fixed action pattern, a series of movements elicited by stimulus such that even when the stimulus is removed, the pattern goes on to completion. Okay, so if there's a stimulus there that the organism has, there's a very predictable series of events that the organism will have as a result. So for example, there might not be the female fish with a red bottom that the male fish is supposed to be attracted to as a result of its evolved behavior. But if you put in another object which resembles the fish, the male fish will be strongly attracted to it in a very predictable way, and you can know exactly what's going to happen. Another great example of this one, you have to pause and watch this. Click on this link or Google goose egg rolling, like on YouTube. You have to pause and watch this one and see. You can trick a goose into taking an object that resembles an egg and rolling it back into its nest just like it is an egg. It is hilarious. You have to pause and watch it. You have to. Okay. Migration is the long-range seasonal movement of animals. It is an evolved, adapted response to variation in resource availability throughout the course of a year that's helping them survive and reproduce. If you had extra time, you could look up monarch butterfly migration by PBS. It's a 10-minute video. And it's very interesting. There's an area, I think in Mexico, where a ton of monarch butterflies fly every year, a certain type of butterfly, and they all fly to this one spot in Mexico, and there's just huge amounts of monarch butterflies there. Again, this is an evolved trait. It's not that they get an email sent to all the butterflies that says, okay, this is when we're going, right? It's an evolved trait, but it helps them survive and reproduce. And in this case, I think a lot of reproduction happens at that Mexico site, if I remember correctly. Or the March of the Penguins. You could look up this specific video, March of the Penguins official trailer number 1, 2005, as an example of migration. And it's evolved behavior moving to help the organisms to reproduce and or survive. Obligate and incomplete migration. Obligate migration is a species that always migrates, and incomplete is they migrate depending on circumstances. Foraging is the act of searching for and exploring food resources. So these animals are going around looking for food. That's foraging. Methods of animal signaling. Signals can be chemical, such as pheromones. They can be sounds, like bird calls, visual, tactile, touch. And many signals are at least in part instinctual or innate. Birds, certain species of birds, they might be taken and raised completely apart from others of their species, and maybe they'll still make the same bird sound because that's an innate sound. Pheromones. Pheromones are a chemical that are secreted as a social response to members of the same species. And a myriad of pheromones exist. So fire ants are an example of a social insect species who depend on trail pheromones to obtain food for the colony. They release certain chemicals that say, hey, this is where the food is, and it's a way of communicating between members. Birds, of course, can use courtship and singing. You think all that singing is just for singing's sake? Nah, this bird's looking for a mating opportunity here. Or displays of aggression, right? The dog has a clear display of aggression. Human, clear display of aggression here, right? This is indicating something. The dog's saying back off, right? The raccoon, if you wanted to for fun, you could take a minute and look up I Just Wanted a Hug from Elf, the scene, and or raccoon and elf scene, and the raccoon displays signs of aggression. It's saying back off, and the Will Ferrell character ignores those signs of aggression. Okay, this one you have to watch. Distraction displays. This is, for example, a signal, come after me, and this can be like in this case with the wild killdeer bird, the mom will try to get a predator to come and take it and leave the babies alone. It's so sad. You have to watch it. The mama bird thinks that the human wants to eat the eggs, and so, or the younglings. I can't remember if they're birds or if they're younglings or eggs at this point. But so mama bird goes in the middle of the parking lot and pretends that she's has a broken wing so that the human will eat her instead of the babies. It's a sacrifice for the babies. You have to watch the link. Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad. But that's an example of a distraction display. Altruistic behaviors. Behaviors that lower the fitness of the individual but increase the fitness of another individual are termed altruistic. The lowering of individual fitness, like the mama bird, to enhance the reproductive fitness of a relative, and thus one's inclusive fitness evolves through kin selection. Sexual selection is a mode of natural selection in which members of one biological sex choose mates of the other sex to mate with. That's intersexual selection. Competition between members of the same sex is intrasexual selection. It's like birds often have fancy coloring or wings or stuff as a form of intersexual selection, where they are choosing a mate based on certain traits. So having fancy colors helps them to survive, not really, but to reproduce. And there's simple learned behaviors. Learned behaviors, even though they may have instinctive components, allow an organism to adapt to changes in the environment and are modified by previous experiences. Habituation, a simple form of learning in which an animal stops responding to a stimulus after a period of repeated exposure, where an organism stops responding to a stimulus that's always there. So, for example, prairie dogs typically sound an alarm when threatened by a predator, but they may become habituated to the sound of human footsteps when no harm is associated, and so over time, that no longer is a signal to them that they should be alarmed. Imprinting is a type of learning that occurs at a particular age or life stage and is a rapid and independent of the species involved. Meaning it's rapid learning, so the baby birds imprint onto the mother, rapid learning, this is mom, I'm going to follow her everywhere we go. There's actually this, you have to watch this link. It's an Instagram link. There's also, you could find on YouTube a 7-minute video, but there's humans that help to raise these baby cranes, and so the humans, so that the baby cranes don't imprint onto them and thus don't do leave for the wild, but actually do okay in the wild and can act like a normal bird. The humans dress up as a bird and these are zookeepers dressing up as birds to interact with the baby cranes so that they act like a normal crane later on. Very funny. And so you can test your understanding here based on this question. Oh, and I didn't put the answer. Okay, the answer, wow, they made B and C really close to each other. And without looking at the video, I don't actually remember if it's B or C, to be honest. But it really doesn't matter. It's B or C. But the idea is they only changed it first object they see or first few objects they see. In terms of AP Bio, it doesn't matter. I don't remember if it's exactly the first object they see or if it's just one of the first few. I think it's C, one of the first few objects they see. So they wear special costumes so that then the cranes don't think that they're not looking for humans as adults, but they know what kind of organism they're looking for. Conditioned behavior. This is types of associative learning where stimulus becomes associated with a consequence. So classical conditioning refers to a learning procedure in which a biologically potent stimulus is paired with a previously neutral stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus is a natural stimulus which causes the natural response. So like something that would naturally be associated with something else. For example, I don't know, maybe a nut falls and it makes a sound that's a natural stimulus. Oh, there's a nut on the ground. Maybe a certain type of animal is attracted to that. Just an example. An unconditioned response is a natural response. The conditioned stimulus is the previously neutral stimulus which becomes associated with a biologically potent stimulus, and the conditioned response is the response as a result. So for example, a dog sees food and it drools and is ready to eat. That is the natural state. The conditioning is to associate that with a bell. So then when the dog hears the bell, it starts to drooling because it thinks, oh, it's going to be able to eat now. So what was what? You should be able to say. And as I was saying, here's a writing of what I just said of those different states. You can pause that if you need to and look at that. Operant conditioning is the conditioned behavior is gradually modified by its consequences as the animal responds to the stimulus. Okay? So, for example, if we have cats and a bell, the cat could learn if it does the bell that it's going to get food, right? And so it can learn the consequence of, oh, if I ring this bell more, I'm going to get more food as a result, and so ring the bell more and more and more. So you could look up, I just checked. You could easily look up cats and bell conditioning and see that example, but you don't have to. But it's really funny. Or training dolphins and rewarding them with food, or with your dog, or whatever, the same kind of thing. Okay, cognitive learning is the manipulation of information using the mind. And cognitive learning theory focuses on metacognition. So this is thinking about thinking. And this is kind of an implication of this, where we can think about like, how do slightly more complicated organisms solve puzzles and things like that. And so this is where, it gets like with faith and science stuff, it's a little interesting because it gets complicated because some like really adherent, how can I say, naturalists, like materialists, will say that, well, humans, just like animals, are only a result of our genetics and our environment, right? And I think as Christians, I don't think we can accept that, right? I think it's, but I want to clarify that, there's going to be some people who say that, but even this is the text from your book. It says this science is controversial. I don't even really think, to be honest, it's not really science. It's getting, because like whether humans are solely this or that is a philosophical and religious issue. So this is brought up at like the end of 36.6, I think, or 36.7 in your text. But it's really like a religious and philosophical thing. As we've talked about, if we get into ethics, ethics is not something that can be directly answered by science. Science tells us how the natural world works. It does not tell us what's right or wrong. Like I said before, like with the kids and the parasites, we can see that there's more parasites in the kids, but science doesn't tell us that we should try to prevent that, right? That's ethics and our faith and our like religion that can tell us that we should prevent that, right? So those are different things. And so I think from a Christian perspective, we believe to at least some extent, it depends on, because there's a variety of Christian perspectives, but almost all Christians would believe at least to some extent in free will, that people have the ability, right, to make choices in ethics, and that they're not just the result of their environment and their genetics, and also in God's will, and that everything is predestined, right? And those things, even a theology teacher, you should go to your Bible teacher and be like, so does predetermination, that everything is determined by God, exclude free will, or vice versa? See what your Bible teacher says, throw that out at them. I think, it's one of those things, it's like, they're kind of both there, and man, I went to, Mr. Fitz would like to hear this, if you remember Mr. Fitz. Mr. Fitz went to a Presbyterian seminary, and I went to a Presbyterian college for my undergrad. And I gotta say, they made a pretty strong case for predestination, predetermination, and that everything is determined by God and under the will of God, right? I think being in West Africa also makes me appreciate the will of God, right? It's not just Muslim West Africa also that says inshallah. If you go to Ghana, they will say God willing. They'll say Nyame Boa. So, that gets into a lot of things. I'm just mentioning it because it's in the text, but we could have an interesting conversation about that after the exam. So that's it for 36. I love some of the examples. They're so funny and varied and just kind of amazing, kind of really amazing, the animal world.